beneficial to articulate the underlying lived structure of a meaningful experience on the level of conceptual awareness. Heidegger also talks about this idea of making lived experience, or making meaning out of this lived experience. So this is one deficit where a lot of the neuroscience, where it has its strengths, it doesn't necessarily tap into is the meaning making of that experience. Through phenomenological approaches, these researchers have found certain aspects of something like a psychotic episode, such as increased spirituality, escaping boundaries of the self, a newfound sense of purpose, that may be potentially healing even transformative factors within their disorders, and has allowed them to reintegrate into society, reintegrate in order to feel a sense of purpose. So given our situation as everybody is, beings thrown into whatever givens and limitations we all have to work within, it's important, I think it's tempting to place the responsibility of our powerlessness on the shoulders of biology or the shoulders of society at large, and particularly in reference to health. But there's no excuse for us to take, quote unquote, the easy way out by just relinquishing any responsibility for our health and well-being to a medication, or leaving it solely up to, well, this is the reason. There's neuroscience involved with this. Irvin Yalom states in his book, Love's Executioner, that the primal stuff of therapy is that basic anxiety emerges from a person's endeavors, conscious or unconscious, to cope with the harsh facts of life, the givens of existence. So, in essence, seeking evidence to validate and normalize our experience may clarify some of our ambiguity and help us feel less misunderstood and alone in our world. But there's this other aspect of our experience, which is this ability to connect with others. The phenomenological approach takes this connection to the other person by really validating what it's like for them to be within their own experience of their own world. It allows us to connect to them, it allows them to connect to us, and to us to connect with each other and be in the world together. I think we've all recognized that with certain disorders, isolation and being alone in the crowd, which is the topic of our discussion today, is a huge problem. So by learning to integrate these two camps, I think it's possible to both give someone this clarity of the ambiguity that's involved with their confusing situation that they seem to be thrown into. It also gives them validation. You're validating their actual experience as, yes, unique to you, but it's also a way that you can empower them to connect with you, help them to feel like an active agent in their lives that is able to really recreate meaning and purpose for themselves. So our ability to be fully in our own world with the other may drastically change, as with greater recognition and experience of the extent of our uniqueness, we may ultimately experience more relatedness and therefore more meaning in our world of chaos. So, continuing on, I believe Kathy is going to come next. She'll be talking about her experiences with integrating these two ideas in practice.
So the title of my paper is Bridging Neuropsychology and Humanistic Existential Theory in Caring for Loved Ones with Traumatic Brain Injuries, with disabilities, chronic illnesses. And so caregiving is a phenomenon that's been studied for quite some time now. According to Schultz and Mertier, I quote, "Before the enactment of Social Security and Medicare, family members were the primary and often only source of support for disabled elderly people. What has changed in the last half century is the number of individuals involved in caregiving, the duration of the caregiving role, and the types of caregiving tasks performed. The research literature shows that although caring for a loved one can be a very rewarding task for some individuals, it can also be a very difficult and stressful task, especially for those individuals that are acting as caregivers for traumatic brain injury and other cognitive disabilities. Research studies show that caretakers of individuals who are ill have many of their own health issues in response to the stress and burden of being a caregiver. Oftentimes for those caregivers, it may be difficult to see the individual who is diagnosed with some form of cognitive or physical disability as a person with feelings, emotions, possibilities, and limitations, rather than just seeing the illness or diagnosis itself. Often the individual who is chronically ill is seen as their diagnosis, rather than an individual with a diagnosis. As a student studying both neuropsychology and humanistic existential theory, I've become aware that it's important to work with individuals without reducing them to nothing but neurochemicals, or just seeing their diagnosis and not the individual as a human being. My personal experience as a caregiver for my father, who was ill with stage 4 brain cancer for almost a year, gives me a different perspective on individuals who are chronically ill, as well as empathy for those individuals who are taking care of those loved ones. From previous personal experience, I try to stay aware of the fact that caregivers have to face additional stress and burden when trying to do the best job taking care of their loved ones. As a result, sometimes it may be harder to focus on their loved one as a human being with an illness, rather than focusing just on the illness alone and viewing it taking over the person they're taking care of. It's easy to fall into a place where the caregiver focuses so much on the diagnosis that they may not focus on the person having their own needs, wants, possibilities, and ways of seeing the world, despite the fact that their world may have changed as a result of their diagnosis or illness. I believe that psychoeducation is very important for caregivers in order to understand the limitations and worlds of their loved one who is struggling with a cognitive or physical disability. And so knowing more about the neurochemical interactions that are associated with the diagnosis is very helpful in understanding the limitations that the individual may now have to face and what they can or cannot do as a result of their diagnosis. By being aware of the limitations of the individual, the caregiver may be able to gain awareness that the world of their loved one may be different from what it used to be, and that the ill individual may now face different possibilities and limitations that are unique to him or her. Thus, the caregiver may gain a new perspective on how he or she can better relate to their loved one with the possibilities and limitations that are present in the world that the loved one finds themselves in. Many caregivers take care of loved ones who are diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries, dementia such as Alzheimer's, amongst other cognitive and physical disabilities. So each year there's approximately 1.5 million individuals who suffer from a mild traumatic brain injury. And it's been found that mild TBI occurs most often from amongst the traumatic brain injuries. Although there are many similar criteria of what constitutes a mild traumatic brain injury, there's no consensus currently in the field of neurology and neuropsychology that gives an exact definition of mild traumatic brain